Okay, so what does our department do? I've been with the department almost 9 years. And when I first got to the department, I did a little bit of research because I'm one of those people that I like to feel really prepared when I go into anything. I like to have all the information at my fingertips, even if I don't look down at anything. That's my safety blanket. And when I took a look at the department, I kept thinking to myself, I'm like, we touch that? And we also do that? And why am I getting legislative inquiries about this thing or that thing? And it always seems to fall within DCA. And if it doesn't squarely fit within DCA, there's still some touch point or relationship with another sister agency or department across the state. So we certainly, hands down, have the largest breadth of variety of any department in the state of New Jersey. And despite the fact that some of our legislators are here today, I will tell you, I think what ends up happening is sometimes when the legislators don't know where to squarely put something in another department across the state, they say there's a community involvement, we're going to stick it in DCA, and they're going to be able to get it across the finish line. So as the saying goes, there's no reward in government for good work other than more work. So every time we do something well, we get a new program, and maybe staff, we should learn from that just a little bit, just saying. But we have, as I think Kaya had mentioned, so we had like local government services, we have fire safety, we have codes and standards, we have housing and community resources, we have disaster recovery and mitigation. We have a lot of offices also, local planning services, government records council. We have Office of Information Privacy. The point I kind of want to get across here is that we touch upon every facet of the lives of New Jersey residents across the state. And we're often charged with some of the most important programs that are going to impact them. What do we kind of cover? We have the Division of Local Government Services. The main function, why it was kind of stood up in its previous iterations, was right after the last Great Depression, right? And it was this whole idea that we don't want any of our municipalities to go into default. We want our municipalities to be financially stable, financially sound, and what that looks like. So at the division, we oversee every municipal budget, every county budget, every fire district budget, and we also look at every authority budget across the state of New Jersey. We also stood up the Local Assistance Bureau. So the Murphy administration was really proud about doing shared services and what that looks like. Because from our vantage point, I'm going to go into this in great detail later on in my quick presentation, but the idea too was, let's stand up a Local Assistance Bureau. We stood up the lab in the Division of Local Government Services with really the premise of how do we provide technical assistance to our municipalities, help them build their capacity when they need it. Also, how do we make sure that we are providing that capacity in the space of shared services? So if they're unsure how to conquer that, we're going to be the ones to step in to make sure that they have the supports to get that accomplished. Then what we also did was we housed where we have the transitional aid program. We housed that also in local government services, and that is under the lab. Again, that goes back to technical services, technical support, how are we going to build these municipalities up? As many of you are aware, Camden is a transitional aid municipality. We also have additional oversight under MIRA. And the whole concept is, how do we create a relationship with the cities? That's the mantra of this administration, what we've done. How do we create that relationship so that way we can make sure that we are bringing up these cities in a way that they are going to be self-sufficient financially moving forward? And I'll go into that in a little more detail too. Codes and standards. So we have the Division of Codes and Standards, which essentially makes sure that we have a uniform construction code across the state of New Jersey. Is everything perfect? Absolutely not. That's why we have the regulatory branch there. So if there are municipalities who feel as if their code office or developers who feel that a code office is not operating uniformly across the state, that's where we go in. We peruse that, make sure that everything is being handled the way it's supposed to, statutorily, and kind of move forward from there. Also unique is that the state of New Jersey is the only state that has a uniform construction code across the entire state. It's not county by county, it's not municipality by municipality, it is statewide. Again, that goes back to making sure that we are kind of overseeing that. Also interesting is that they oversee all the amusement park rides across the state of New Jersey. So if you go to Great Adventure, if you go to a fair, a carnival, whatever that might be, they're the folks who are inspecting those rides to make sure that they are safe for operation. American Dream was just recently stood up. That was another huge hurdle for staff to kind of get through, and we're kind of constantly working our way through that. Local planning services. Local planning services is really much like what it sounds like. It used to be COA. before COA became moribund under the Christie administration. And now, under the A4S50 legislation that Governor Murphy signed back in March, that was kind of like the landmark legislation for affordable housing across the state of New Jersey. It has officially done away with COA. So what we did was we kind of rebranded what that division was going to look like, and we turned that into local planning services. The goal there is to help municipalities and counties in developing what their land use, what their downtowns, what their main streets are going to look like. So anytime they need assistance, we also have grant programs and funding through that division to kind of make sure that we are standing them up and supporting them in what their goals are going to look like at the local level. They're also going to take on a huge portion of what A4 and S50 is going to look like. We're really trying to make sure, and I'm going to go through this too, about silos and breaking that down, that all of our divisions are working together. So that's housing, local planning services, the commissioner's office with our data, and making sure that we've got these calculations correct and that we're providing assistance to municipalities in getting their affordable housing obligations met. Fire safety. Fire safety, very similar to codes and standards, making sure that there are uniform fire codes not only across the state of New Jersey, but that everybody who is trained in fire service has the same training. So Fire Safety 1 in North Jersey is going to look like Fire Safety 1 in South Jersey, same thing with Fire Safety 2 and what that kind of looks like. Also, they provide a lot of additional support if there are fires. So we have canines who are trained in detecting certain incendiary either devices or chemicals and what that kind of looks like. Disaster Recovery and Mitigation, formerly known as the Sandy Recovery Division. So this was stood up in the wake of Sandy. It was really our quick pivot and we learned a lot of lessons in that time period. How do we provide assistance to disaster survivors? What does that kind of look like? And while we originally thought Sandy was going to wind down and we were going to segue away from that, that is not to be, because apparently we are going to have lots of large storms that are going to be hitting our coast. So we've seen Ida, we've seen Irma. And so what we did was we stood it up, said we're going to now call it disaster recovery and mitigation and make sure that we have a central funding source, whether that is federal or state dollars, that are going to come through and stand up these programs. And they have been operating extraordinarily efficiently. Office of Information Privacy. Our role really is to make sure that we are redacting at all of the governmental levels, whether that is the local, the county, or the state level, to make sure that nobody's home address, home contact information is available to the public. The legislature has been slowly but surely expanding that. Started off kind of with judges, prosecutors, law enforcement. That's now being expanded into DCPMP workers. That's also being expanded to certain folks in the legislature. And that just seems to be kind of taking it one step at a time so that we keep expanding what that pool looks like. We've got oversight of the NJRA, HMFA, Historic Trust, Urban Enterprise Zones, and Government Records Council. So as you can tell, we are kind of busy. It never ceases to amaze me how much we kind of take on from a daily perspective, but I think we've kind of figured out how to coalesce with each other and stand up our programs and support our programs by making sure that all staff is communicating effectively with each other. One of the things that I kind of wanted to hone in on, because this is really where we start to engage with the community partners, is some of the things that we're looking to do with the pillars across DCA. And I give our comms team really the credit for this, along with Chief of Staff Kaya King, because when we were kind of just sitting around conference tables talking about some of our initiatives and our policies and what we wanted to get accomplished in the last couple of years with this administration, we started to kind of figure out what the themes were here, and it almost is like a three-legged stool. So one of the things that we really focused on is data driving our decision-making. So DCA truly has become a data hub. Our data hub actually was just recently updated, so this is perfect timing. But the whole goal is so that individuals, community partners, local governments, et cetera, can tap into our data hub to help them make the decisions that they need to make, whether that is legislative, whether that is for ordinances, whether that is for figuring out where it's best to plug in their funding because they're going to get the best return on their investment. And that's what we're trying to do too. So we're essentially putting our money where our mouth is, as well as our data where our mouth is, because we want to make sure that as belts need to get tightened over the next couple of years when some of the federal funding is going to dry up, that we're investing in the places that make the most economic sense. And one example that I can actually give you, because I try to always have concrete examples of what we're saying, don't just do what I say, but actually understand why we're doing it that way. In our eviction prevention programming, one of the things that we looked at was one of our smallest eviction programs ended up being that if we had flexibility in giving out funding, so if somebody had an issue with a car, maybe it was a flat tire or something went on, maybe one of their serpentine belt went, We don't have a program to fix somebody's car for, $200, $300, $400. That doesn't exist. But what ends up happening is if somebody can't fix their car so they can go to work and then pay their rent, they end up making that tough decision and they make the car repair so they can go to work, but then they're behind in their rent. And then they never catch up. And then the landlord goes to evict them. And then they come to us for emergency rental assistance or eviction prevention or whatever that looks like. So what we figured out in our studies was that providing that one-time efficiency spending to help them repair their car ended up on average costing somewhere between $400 and $600 for the average home. Versus if we allowed them to kind of fall into the homelessness cycle, it took about $24,000 once they actually entered into homelessness. So we said to ourselves, well, let's try to catch them upstream so they never get into that cycle in the first place. Also, the biggest predictor for homelessness is being homeless as a child. So if we can capture those families and those kids upstream for $400 to $600 on average, and then not just that, but we also went back to look at it and said to ourselves, how long did that money actually last? Not only did it stop them from going into homelessness, but the data, I think we've got about 6 months worth of data that far, and it shows that for at least 6 months, none of those families fell back into that cycle. So the money's working. So again, this just goes back to using data, not just our gut intuition. We have a good sense as to what's working, but this really moves it forward. The next is stakeholder engagement partnership. I don't know what's going to be the best thing for every community across the state of New Jersey. I see trends, I have data, but what we need is just like the Neighborhood Revitalization Tax Credit Program, is for the community partners to engage with us and tell us what they think is best for their communities. We're willing to listen. We're willing to be active partners in what that conversation looks like. Now, I always say that with a little caveat, always a little asterisk, it's the lawyer hat, one of the other hats that I wear on a typical basis, is just come to us though with the plan that you want to execute, right? Come to us showing why you think it's the best plan. And we are willing and able to have a cordial conversation about what that looks like. There's always room for improvement, and we're willing to accept whatever that might look like. And then the solutions-focused perspective in managing challenges just ties in perfectly with both of those. We're not looking to make excuses for things, we're looking to make improvements on things. So that really requires some engagement on the community's part so that we know what's not working well so that we can pivot and make those changes, but also using the data to kind of make sure that we're making the right decisions moving forward. Now, as far as kind of what we were looking to do, facts and not simply intuition. We kind of talked about that with the data driving, collaboration, not individual silos. After COVID, we all kind of went back into our own little fiefdoms of what that looked like across not just the state, but also local governments. It was extraordinarily important for us to get the funding out that we needed to, and while that was so helpful, we kind of realized that we were no longer engaging in meaningful conversation with our sister agencies and even our own divisions. So we started looking into our own practices in the department, peeling back the layer of onion that was there, and figuring out how do we have open, meaningful conversations amongst our directors, so that way you might need to stay in your own lane, but just put a blinker on when you're gonna veer into somebody else's and have that conversation. So we were trying to make sure that we were having those open conversations and then looping in, so if we can show that we can do it as DCA, then we can also expect it from some of our sister agencies, which is why we started doing things like the lead program, which was the last road show that we just did up in Plainfield last week. In dealing with lead, we started to realize we can't do this alone. We've got lead in DOH, we've got lead in DEP, we've got lead in DOE. Yet we're the ones who have the funding to remediate and abate lead. So how do we converse with all of our sister agencies to make sure that we're actually capturing kids when they're tested at a young age, whether that's through health or education? And then how do, if it's not in the home when we're performing the inspections, link up with DEP so they can go out to the schools and to the environmental components of where that child is active, so that we can kind of make sure that we're capturing it as a holistic approach. So those are the types of meaningful engagements that we're trying to engage in. And then of course, results, not excuses. So I don't like saying we don't know and we can't figure it out. It's just something ingrained in my being. And luckily for me, our staff is pretty much the same way. So we're always trying to figure out the solutions going forward. And again though, that comes back to also relying on our community partners around the state to make sure that we're hearing it from you and we can address it going forward. Capital stack. So it doesn't just work when you're trying to finance a project, but it really does work when we're trying to move the needle forward on our programming. Yes, it's important for us to get the money out that the legislature or the federal government gives us, but if it's not going to have a meaningful impact in the long term, why are we doing that? So what we're always trying to figure out is how do we layer it in, like I said, not just with our sister agencies, with our community partners to make sure that we're effective in what that looks like. And on top of it, we're trying to make legacy changes here. I don't want a one-time program that's going to last 2 years and help some people, and then it completely dries up in the third year, and then we're right back to square one. We want to make sure that we're making meaningful changes and tweaks to our program so that way there's going to be a lasting impact on what that looks like for our communities. So one of the things that our department has always kind of honed in on is housing first. It's just the model that if you don't have a safe, stable place to call home, how are you going to be a functioning member of society, right? If my kids don't have a place to sleep, how are they going to be well rested so they can function in school? If I don't have a place to shower, how am I going to go to work? If I don't have a place to keep my medication, how am I going to treat my medical condition? So that's kind of the mantra that comes out of DCA. Driving policies and programs through data. Kind of like what I talked about, right? We're really trying to make sure that we are using the data to drive our decisions. Not just do we want the data, and I know sometimes we say like, well, you need that gut check, you need that intuition of somebody who's had the experience before. And that's where we kind of come back into our stakeholders. What's working in your communities and what's not. I'm the last person who's going to come into a community and say, I know what your community needs more than you do. You're the elected officials. You're the ones working in those communities. It's a partnership that we need to kind of work on going forward. Building the public sector workforce. So this goes back into when I was saying we had some issues in backfilling positions. We started realizing that there weren't enough CMFOs to go around the state of New Jersey, which are certified municipal finance officers. There weren't enough CCFOs going around for the counties. What do we do in these spaces? In January 2023, I launched an internship program at the department. The goal was we've been going around to every university. We haven't hit every single one across the state yet, but we are certainly making our way through them. We are engaging with them to figure out how do we create the pipeline of students who should be or will want to enter into government work and actually funnel them into those positions. 9 times out of 10, actually it's more like 9.999 times out of 10 that I've seen in my experience, none of our opportunities in state or local government are actually being portrayed in the universities and colleges. Every public accounting student that we talked to said to me, I had no idea that any of these opportunities existed, and I didn't know what to do with that. We piloted it with the CFOs, with the accounting students. What we said was, let's rotate them through. So we broke our internship up into 3 components. The first component was they'd be with us at the state. We wanted them to see the back end work of what financial regulations does, how they look at a budget once it comes in from a municipality. Then we send them to a local government, whether that's a municipality or a county, who, in our estimation, is operating efficiently and well. And we want them to see what actually goes into creating that budget. What does that work look like? And then the third component of that was we put them with a local finance board so they can see what the private side does, who provides the services to the local governments in driving forward what their financial picture is going to look like, how they advise them on what initiatives they're going to do financially. It's been highly successful. We actually just got an email today from one of our first ever intern and telling us like what he's doing and how he's working. He started as a freshman or sophomore. He's going into his senior year. Really exciting. It kind of like renewed my vigor a little bit. I really like dealing with the kids because they're still, I won't use the other word, but they're still filled with vinegar and they like want to get out there and they want to like really drive things home. And so it's great to kind of see what that looks like. We're now expanding that into business administration, clerks, et cetera. We're partnering with the League of Municipalities. We're actually going to feature an event at the League of Municipalities with them. We're going to be bringing down a lot of the students and the interns, not for the whole League of Municipalities and certainly not for the after hours events, but just for them to get to see exactly what it looks like from our perspective and what these opportunities can be. And then we've been working with the universities to make sure that their curriculum matches what the requirements are for them to sit for a certification or a licensure. So that way, when they get out of school, they can start working immediately instead of saying to themselves, great, now I need to sit for another 2 or 3 classes and I got to commute to only Rutgers offers that in these locations around the state. And how does that work for me? So we're trying to kind of streamline these processes. If anybody's interested in participating in the internship program, helping us to funnel, or just literally taking our playbook and implementing it yourselves, we've been also helping municipalities all around the state do that. We pay our interns. We're also moving to figure out how they can also get credit for doing that. Many of the universities will allow them to do that as well. So that's us trying to come up with creative solutions to the issues, making sure that we're having those open lines of communication with the educational institutions around the state of New Jersey who are going to create the pipeline for us to make sure that we have the professionals we need in our local governments and the state.